What's up, guys? Thank you for tuning into the episode. Sorry, it's been a little while since my last one. And in this episode, we kind of go into like kind of what goes wrong with metabolism and exactly like why we're in this state where people are trying to, restrict their diet and like exactly how the medical system and the food system have got us to the place where people are fasting or just restricting carbohydrates in general, thinking that they can't eat foods they like. So we kind of went into this and just like, why has this happened? And then also like, how do we fix it so that we can live our lives and kind of get to this ultimate goal, which is a lot harder to do when you don't have the energy, which is one of the main symptoms of like subclinical hypothyroidism, meaning that they have low thyroid and it's commonly being like cold hands and feet. And I felt the difference with myself just whenever I take my body temperature and it's, closer to 98.6 where it should be. I feel a lot better than when I'm, maybe around 97.5 or a little bit lower. Being that it's so easy to check your body temperature and your pulse rate, those are two things I would kind of recommend for people. But Anaylyze and Optimize have taught me so much about this point of view, just their videos on YouTube and their Twitter account, Outdoctrination on Twitter. But then they also have a company called Prism, and the website's prism.miami. They've been very helpful to me just kind of with the amount of supplements that they know about. And then also just like addressing like basic things such as like, trying to walk more and use red light and how that might be able to affect your thyroid health, which is going to affect your like libido, mood, energy, and all those things. I really like this episode and I want to do future episodes with them. So, hopefully this one does well and we can keep doing more of these. Enjoy the episode. Appreciate all the work you guys have done on Twitter. It's been helpful for me, navigating this. So appreciate it.
Thanks for having us.
It's the morning. So you guys did like a deep fast and, skip breakfast so that you can focus well for this podcast.
Yeah, man. I took my ketones this morning just to make sure that I'm in deep autophagy. And yeah, I think my last meal was on Thursday. I had 2 avocados.
Legitimately though, that's what I used to do. I was like writing out a tweet for this actually, where I would wake up, go for a run, go for a lift, come back, and then still not eat, and think that like that was like the healthiest way. So I don't know, when did that like flip for you guys? Kind of that, I'm going to function better and actually feed myself throughout the day versus just fasting.
Well, essentially, so my freshman year of college, I got really fat because I was doing, I was just being like a college person eating at, whatever crap that they have out. And, I would lift, but like, I wasn't like caring for my body or whatever. So then I tried keto in 2018 summer, and I lost a crap ton of weight, did a lot of fasting, was doing 1 meal a day. And when I lost all the weight, I was like, well, I don't want to go back to being fat again. So I guess I'll just keep doing this. I kept doing the 1 meal a day stuff throughout my sophomore year. So like 2018, 19. And then, yeah, it just kind of kept getting like more progressive. Like I would do longer fasts. Like I would do 2-day fast, 3-day fast, dry fast. So like you're not drinking any water. I remember throughout finals, I literally fasted for 2 weeks straight. I didn't have a single meal throughout my entire last finals period of my sophomore year in college. Still did well, surprisingly. But yeah, so then, after that point in that summer of 2019, my body pretty much just completely broke down. It was just way too much stress on the body. And I ended up developing like some absolutely horrible, like debilitating gut problems that took me, a couple of years to really figure out. But yeah, it wasn't until like late 2020 when I found out about Danny Roddy and Georgie. And then obviously Pete from there. And then things kind of started to click. Obviously, like it was a gradual transition. It was like, oh, like I'm just going to have like a tablespoon of honey or whatever. And then like a couple months later, it's like, you're just putting white sugar in the coffee and you're kind of understanding the importance of keeping stress low and starting to look back at yourself 6 months ago and being like, wow, I can't believe I did that. And I survived, like, let alone thought that was healthy. So yeah, and it's been, a gradual relearning process, like kind of just trying to break out of any sort of dietary dogmas of like, oh, this is like a diet that you're supposed to eat. Like, getting more into the mindset of like, true health should be like, you should be able to, eat whatever you want, like within reason, and have energy and have good gut function and be in a good mood and have good sleep. You shouldn't have to be on like some crazy restrictive diet just to like maintain weight and like look halfway decent, or anything like that. So yeah, I would say that's really what the past couple of years have been, is just, trying to learn and, hopefully sharing the message along the way, about that. But yeah, that was kind of my personal experience with it.
The thing I like about like the bioenergetic, like repeat kind of style is once you like learn a little bit about it, it's like kind of builds on top. So like when I first started like listening to your guys' stuff or Danny Ratty or whatever, it made no sense. And then now I'm like, all right, trying to like understand like more. And I actually think it's literally because you become smarter, because when you're not running on the stress hormones, so you can like kind of have more at your disposal. So I'm curious for you, Jack, was it like the same kind of transition? Did you go to keto and then on to repeat?
Yeah, so we went to college together, and I was getting like a little fat, I would say. So I tried, doing what he was doing when we got back to school and whatever. Not gonna lie, it was pretty fun. Being in college, just getting shredded, running on those stress hormones.
It's great for the first couple of months. Like, it's so fun.
Yeah, no, it was, and then
I think some
no,
people have a lower stress like threshold. Because for me, like I'd never like fueled myself for like 18 years. So then when I tried to do keto, even for like 1 month, it tanked me. So I think it's literally like the stress level that you have going into it.
Yeah, and then you get to a certain point where it's just, some people get to that point quicker where, the point of no return, where it's just too much. So I guess I did it for a while, got pretty shredded, and then I was like, I just feel better with carbs kind of intuitively. So I would just kind of eat carbs, not really sugar, more like rice, stuff like that. But I was always still into the keto. And then I guess I started seeing content that kind of went against the worldview. And then we were talking about it, and it was a tough to get us like both like fully on board. Cause even though I was eating carbs, I kind of thought keto was still kind of good for most people, even though it wasn't really good for me because I couldn't sleep when I was doing keto. I was just like really angry, really stressed out. So, I added some carbs in, and it definitely helped. And then after that, I just, started doing sugar. And then once we both got into the bioenergetic stuff, it just, took off.
I love to talk about serotonin because I know for me, myself, I got prescribed like SSRIs. And
Oh, wow.
I know that's like the main, I never went like high dose. And after like 3 to 6 months or less of doing it, I started to like get my sleep and, diet in. So I think it wasn't obviously contributing to the SSRI that was causing me to feel better. It was everything else I was doing. But I think for a lot of people, like more often now with like younger people, they're really getting depressed because everything in the environment is like serotonin signaling. And then they're getting told that serotonin is like good for them and they should get on an SSRI. So I don't know. I just think that your videos about serotonin is like so interesting. So if you could kind of just go into a little bit of like how our environment and, lifestyle kind of dictates a serotonin state.
Yeah, for sure. So obviously you have the issues like with the drugs themselves, but that's really just the tip of the iceberg when you think about it. So, there's two like main pools of serotonin, if you will. Most of it is produced in the gut. And then you also have a good amount that's produced in the brain. The serotonin that's produced in the gut tends to circulate systemically. So it can really have a, systemic impact on your overall metabolism. But yeah, I mean, the modern environment really does gear you towards being like very serotonergic. I think the most important piece to sort of recognize there is that serotonin is really released in the brain specifically under conditions of inescapable stress. So there's a lot of animal studies done on this where, they can see rises in brain serotonin if you restrain the animals and you put them in a situation that they can't get out of. But if you administer serotonin antagonists or drugs that block serotonin, or if you do the opposite and give them a dopamine producing drug, then they keep fighting essentially. Like they break out of the so-called learned helplessness, which is basically this idea that, well, I'm in a situation, there's something I can do about it. So why would I even try to do anything else? Why would I try to break out of the situation? There's nothing I can do. And in that sense, serotonin is actually a brilliant strategy for survival. Because if you think about it from like an adaptive mechanism, it would make sense that if you were in a situation where there really were no options, to not continue to expend energy and focus and peace of mind on the situation, it's better to shut down the energy metabolism, which is something that serotonin is known to do, and really just, produce this sort of numbing effect. It really numbs you to your senses. So something that I like to say is that, like, if you ever like a kid growing up, and maybe like an authority figure like yelled at you for like playing or for like doing something that you really liked, and then you would just get that wave of like, oh wow, like I'm like, I was wrong for like trying to have fun. I'm like, I don't deserve this. Like and then you kind of just go into this like shutdown state where like you don't want to talk to anyone, like you feel really bad about yourself, and then the world kind of becomes cloudy. That's all driven by serotonin, and it really is this adaptive mechanism to put the brakes on metabolism and to sort of numb you to your senses, again, because of that learned helplessness that I was referring to. And yeah, in that sense, it is a good thing, but it's definitely not something that makes you happy. It's definitely, in the world today, people are being told, that there is nothing that they can do about their situation. Oftentimes, people are maybe they're locked into marriages or relationships, or they're in certain situations that they can't get out of financially, or they're in a job that they don't like, or they have, any number of these political events that we really don't have control over, but that are kind of being shoved down our throat all the time. So the entire modern environment is geared towards putting you in a stressful situation, and then also telling you that there's nothing you can do about it, and that there's no real meaning to life or to anything, that you should really just put your head down and work until you're 65, and then hope that you can retire after that.
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, everything about it really does foster you towards that high serotonin state, and that's not even touching on the GI stuff, which is probably an even bigger contributor. So serotonin is produced in the gut pretty much anytime that you have any sort of irritation or inflammation in the digestive tract. So if you're constipated, that's a very reliable way to increase your serotonin. In fact, people with Parkinson's disease, one of the best predictors of, having a worse outcome later on in the disease is actually constipation. And I think that that's because serotonin obviously opposes dopamine, and Parkinson's is known as this dopamine deficient disease. And the constipation is the perfect way to set up that high serotonin, low dopamine state. So yeah, and then you also have all these other things in the food that are highly serotonergic, that are highly irritating. So, a lack of motility in the bowels is just one thing. But then you have, all of these like irritating fibers that people can't necessarily tolerate, that their gut isn't functioning properly. A lot of things that are just generally inhibiting the metabolism, the motility of the gut. And then the biggest one is the bacteria. So if you have problems with bacterial overgrowth, that is one of the most reliable ways to, introduce tons and tons of serotonin systemically through the gut. It's been shown that animals that have their colons sterilized, they produce about 90% less serotonin systemically. So really it's the gut bacteria that will end up driving a lot of this. And that's why, a lot of people that find the bioenergetic stuff, or may, try the carrot salad, or they try antibiotics or other maybe antimicrobial herbs, things like pau d'arco or oregano oil or things like that. You can experience such a dramatic world shift because you're reducing the bacterial load and the inflammation in the intestine, and that's lowering your serotonin systemically. So, yeah.
That's one of the things I've noticed is like the gut really dictates everything. And as soon as you start to have like leaky gut or constipation, it pretty much like your health could be perfect, but as soon as that happens, you know, you're going to start to feel depressed and all that. So what kind of foods? I mean, obviously you don't want to like be eating bad foods, but like for some people, they just can't seem to like tolerate carbs. So did you guys like titrate up, or did you just like start like going like heavy into carbs? You know, because some people, if they're coming from like lower carb diets, it's hard for them to like, I don't know, get on board with eating a lot of carbs right away. And then you have the whole thing with like competing between fats and carbs. So if you're eating a lot of carbs, then you just start, or if you're eating a lot of fat and then you start putting on carbs, you're just going to start, you know, gaining body fat. So how do you look at that?
Yeah. So first off, you're absolutely right about the gut being very central to everything. You know, that's actually why we started our new consulting company, because we felt like, you know, introducing a gut centric paradigm and trying to help people through that way is probably the most important thing imaginable. And it's like, you know, I've been in that situation where, you know, you're trying like a bunch of different diets and supplements and things, and like nothing seems to like really work. And that almost always comes down to a problem in the gut. And then once you solve that, everything else starts to make a little bit more sense. So in terms of people not tolerating carbs, from a digestive perspective, I don't think it's like necessarily the carbohydrate content. I think it's more the foods that people will get carbs from. So whether it's like a processed donut or something that has a bunch of coloring and emulsifiers and actually has a lot of starch, that might be, you know, not gelatinized, so it's a little bit harder to digest, or it might have fortified iron, which is a serious problem in the gut. Things like that can definitely cause a ton of digestive discomfort and problems. And then a lot of the fibrous foods, you know, if your gut is not in a good place and it's, you know, very inflamed, you have motility issues and bacterial overgrowth, then adding lots and lots of fiber on top of that is going to exacerbate things quite a bit. From the metabolic perspective, I think that, yeah, it probably would be better to try to sort of titrate up your carbohydrates because, yeah, like you said, if you've been in a very stressful situation or a low carb diet for a while, you know, the body's pretty adapted to running on fat. The free fatty acid levels in the blood are going to be very high. And then at that point, trying to reintroduce the sugar might cause an issue. Then the other problem is that people might just like add sugar like right on top of their existing like high fat diet. And, you know, obviously in that situation, that's not optimal. I think you'd have to probably dial back the fat quite a bit. Not that you have to go on like a low fat diet necessarily, but I think that you would want to hit somewhere around like half your calories from carbs, and then the other 50% probably split protein and fat depending on, you know, your individual needs. Something, you know, that's not like a hard and fast rule, but something like that is probably best for most from what I've seen. But yeah, trying to gradually get up there is probably ideal. And then the other thing with people gaining weight from this stuff is that I think they hear like, oh, like I can drink a bunch of orange juice and eat a bunch of ice cream and like just my metabolism is just going to keep going up. Like, and you know, there's obviously a lot more, there's a lot more to this story than that. And I think that overeating is definitely real, especially if you've been in a situation where you've been chronically fasting and restricting your calories and stuff for years on end. Yeah, I think that overeating is definitely like a overcompensating sort of mechanism that's there. Like it's definitely a real thing. So you need to weigh that with where you are at metabolically, and then yeah, try to make these changes like relatively slow and in a smart way, not just, you know, pounding a pint of Haagen-Dazs at every meal, expecting for your metabolic rate to just keep churning up without changing anything else in your life. And yeah,
I think it's the ice cream. Like once you get the, you know, the go on ice cream, you're just like, oh shit. And you can't, like if you were previously restricting it, it's just like a natural defense for your body to want to eat it. So it makes a lot of sense.
Oh yeah, totally.
But I know for myself, when I switched over to like eating more carbs, I basically became like I could put down like 200 carbs pretty easily and just like not even feel anything. So I don't know, like, do you think like where do you like see like thyroid supplementation into like this? Do you kind of see that as like way down the line, only if you had previously, maybe done something to damage your thyroid, such as like going on a fast for like a long period of time, or, restricting calories for 6 months. Cause I know I did that. So I'm sure my metabolic rate was so low after, 6 months of like basically a crash diet. So
Yeah. Yeah. In terms of thyroid supplementation, one of the things that I find interesting is that, like, I kind of think of thyroid supplementation a lot of time as like just adding in food that has been lost over the last 40 or 50 years. So, anthropologically, historically, if you really want to talk about like ancestral eating, it was very common for our distant ancestors to probably consume lots of thyroid gland directly. Uh, and that has actually been hypothesized to be a pretty big driving force in, our expanded metabolic rate, our expanded brain over time. It's because we were eating the thyroid gland of animals, and that was able to improve our metabolism to the point where we could afford to, expend more energy on the brain and on things like that. So, yeah. And then you look at traditional societies or traditional populations, they were eating nose to tail. They would eat thyroid glands. It was only until the mid 80s when we stopped eating thyroid gland, like as a society. And that was really because there was a few cases of thyrotoxicosis in hamburger meat. So essentially, when they used to prepare hamburger meat, they would do a practice called gullet trimming. So they would cut around the neck of the cow to harvest whatever meat and collagenous tissue and whatever else. But you would also inadvertently, of course, get some thyroid gland in there. And that was, standard for the ground beef at the time. And then there was a few outbreaks, some like poor sort of industrial farming practices. And then there were some outbreaks of thyrotoxicosis, which is essentially having way too much thyroid gland in the meat. And then people start like sweating up and going manic because they're having too much thyroid gland at once. So then the FDA kind of cracked down and said that this practice is banned from here on out. So from that point on, which is like the mid 80s, we have not been consuming thyroid gland, which we probably would have for the majority, if not all of human history before then. So I like to frame it in that sense, because when you take a natural desiccated thyroid supplement, you are just eating like a gland of an animal. It's really not that different from if you eat liver or you eat heart, or even eating muscle meats, for that matter. So, I don't necessarily think that it's like this crazy risky thing that people may make it out to be. Now, with that being said, it can be a little bit tricky to find the correct dose and maybe the right ratios for a lot of people. So I think that if you're trying to improve the metabolic rate, it's probably not the first thing that I would go towards, especially because if you're in a very compromised state, you can end up shuttling a lot of the thyroid hormone into reverse T3, which can turn on the stress systems, and that can be a problem in and of itself. So I typically suggest that people, gut first, and then think about things like B vitamins. Look at what your diet is like. If you're having sufficient amounts of calories, if you can actually tolerate and you're not just putting on tons of fat. B vitamins are huge in that. A lot of people are deficient in vitamin D. Trying to align the circadian rhythm in the light environment. I mean, we're under incandescent lights right now. That makes a bigger deal than a lot of people may first realize. So things like that, modifying the environment, and then really nailing down nutrition and the gut function. I think those would be the biggest levers that people can pull. But if all of that is not doing it, or, you're in a situation where, I have to be indoors like all day, and, I'm in a very stressful situation, and some of this other stuff, just isn't really feasible, or I have to eat cafeteria food or whatever the case may be, then I think, things like pregnenolone, progesterone, and then thyroid can be extremely helpful. But the good thing is that there's like a lot of tools in the arsenal. So, if someone doesn't tolerate thyroid, they can try drinking more coffee, or vice versa. If someone doesn't tolerate pregnenolone, they could try progesterone, or vice versa. And then if someone doesn't tolerate any of those things, there's things like the mushrooms that are a little bit less, thought of. And then if someone doesn't, they don't like the idea of taking a prescription antibiotic, there's herbal antimicrobials that you can use, things like that. So, you try to frame things in a way where there's a lot of options for people. But I do think that thyroid is one of the biggest things. And I think it's appropriate to be consuming it, not as like a synthetic biohacker thing, but just as a thing that people probably should be doing.
I like how you frame that as like something we would have had, because whenever you think of like the carnivore diet or ancestral diets, like there's just like little like talk about like thyroid. And I know my cholesterol was in the past have been like high when I was doing carnivore diet, and my testosterone was low. So like that should be like an immediate red flag, because like the thyroid is converting the cholesterol into testosterone. So I don't know, like, do you just think that most of like these like carnivore and low carb diets just don't really like even like look at like physiology or just like anything in general about how the body works? And it's more so just like, oh, well, this is like antidote. Like I'm losing weight on this, so that's why I'm doing it. Like, I don't know, like where's like the perspective on that?
I mean, I think that there's like nuggets of truth in everything. So that's the thing is a lot of times when I end up like figuring out like, oh, wow, this is like, at least in my perspective, like, oh, this is like kind of a bunch of crap. Like there's always like some truth to it. It's very rarely that something is just like completely made up. So that goes for even like when the FDA or the USDA says something that I think is ridiculous. Like there's always like some truth to like what they're saying. I just don't think that it's being represented correctly or in context. So, there are bits of truth with low carb and carnivore and ancestral eating and things like that. But I think that it kind of tends to ignore a lot of physiology and biochemistry. And to be honest, I mean, even people that are really into repeat stuff, not that anybody does anything like maliciously or intentionally, but I think that we can tend to do this, like we can be guilty of the same thing where it's like we're ignoring important pieces that may change our perspective about things, and ultimately present like an oversimplified model of things. So I would say that I think that the low carb approach might be a little bit more guilty of that, but I think in general, it's kind of something that we're always striving for in the content is to provide more context and more options and, just continuing to learn, because, once you get stuck into one sort of framework or paradigm, it's kind of hard to break out of that, because then you've been stuck in that mindset for a while, and you could just become resistant to change, and ultimately like you're only making things worse for yourself because you're not learning and continuing to try to improve. So yeah. And then in terms of the sort of like ancestral viewpoint, I think that a lot of it gets ignored in the low carb carnivore sort of spheres. And then a lot of it can be, I don't want to say cherry picking, but like a lot of it might just be like fantasizing about like what happened like a million years ago or something without necessarily like looking at research, or even if the research does agree with that, stopping to think like, okay, well, maybe, we don't live in, the caveman times. So whatever that they did back then may not be super relevant to us. And, not to say that there's nothing to be gleaned from a more naturalistic viewpoint, but it's like, if you're not putting your feet in the grass and you're not going out and touching animals and you're not playing in the sun all day and you're not with your community all the time and you're not like, in a strong relationship or any of those things, and everything about your life is synthetic and sort of boxed in. I don't know that why one would think that eating like lots of steak and things would be like the answer, or even like congruent with the way that you're living typically. And so I think that, a lot of things like that can be useful to understand, like, oh yeah, like, well, we probably should be like outside more, and we probably should be like in community more. We probably are being harmed by things like EMF and artificial light and things like that. So I think that those things are important to consider. But yeah, I think the way that the ancestral living may be promoted typically, may not be super accurate.
I think it's kind of like the seesaw where they started, like we ate like normally, and then we started going to low fat, and then it's like kind of like this reversal back to high fat. And yeah, like you said, it's going to be like in the middle. Like the carnivore does get right about like kind of like the problems with like eating like tons of like raw vegetables, or just like cruciferous vegetables in general. But you know, do we really need to be only eating meat? Like probably we need the nutrients from the meat, but then we need the other things. I kind of think of it as like, well, if you put the nutrients in, then you want the sugar to like kind of like rev the engine up. I feel like that's like a good model. Is that how you guys see it?
Yeah, I definitely think so. And I think I think you really nailed it because, like sugar in and of itself is a nutrient. Like you can't, preach the importance of something like vitamin B1 and then not understand that, a large part of the reason why vitamin B1 is so important is because it allows us to metabolize carbohydrate and produce CO2 and, go on to produce reducing equivalents or antioxidant equivalents from that glucose. The same thing with vitamin B6. You need it to basically import energy made from glucose into the mitochondria where it can be metabolized. So, all these things work together, and, just having like the energy or just having the micronutrients, it's kind of like, just having a car engine or just having oil. Like, you need both in order to go anywhere. So yeah. And I think, you know, I think that you can get a lot of really good nutrition, eating 80 to 100 to 120 grams of protein a day. If you're eating, high quality meats, liver, eggs, dairy, shellfish, those things are incredibly nutrient dense, to pair with, other more carbohydrate rich foods or plant foods. So yeah, I don't think that you need to like just have your whole diet be all of these like crazy nutrient dense foods with zero carbs and nothing else. I don't think that is particularly helpful either. So yeah.
Do you guys find it more effective to like space out your meals versus like grazing? Because I know, so I came from like 1 to 2 meals a day, so I was like always like fire up like 1,000 or 1,500 calories for a meal. So then once I learned about like eating more frequently, I guess this is more so a question about like liver health as well in general, because I would always wake up in the middle of the night and then just fast to like kind of feel good. So then once I started eating more, I was like, oh, I can't really like go like that long without, getting hungry again. And I think largely because of like, fasting is going to like hurt your liver. So I don't know if you guys like have more insight about that kind of like the idea that, the sugar gets stored in your liver and then when you need it, it goes to being used. And then if you fast, you're kind of degrading that process and you're having to like break down protein and all that. So it's like inherently stressful, but they don't really talk about that just because you're not getting like the blood sugar spike or whatever. The lower carb diets just consider, okay, well, it's fine that you're not eating any sugar because you're going to be steady, but kind of like doesn't talk about the fact that you're degrading your liver in the process. And I know I've felt that where like now when I try to eat carbs, it's like not really storing. It's like, and like I've had liver enzymes elevated and all that. So it's like, where's the balance here?
Yeah, I think that is something that a lot of people may struggle with when they're trying to reintroduce carbs into the diet is that, you come from this paradigm where you're like chronically like lower blood sugar, or at least like low glucose oxidation, like in your cells. And then, yeah, people get into situations where they think like, or they feel like they, cannot go periods of time without consuming carbs, once they're making that transition. And that's something that I've went through myself. But yeah, I think you definitely nailed it about liver stuff. And you can't talk about liver without talking about gut because, the liver is actually like considered part of the gut, as weird as that sounds. liver gets all of the nutrients first before any of the other tissues in the body do. And then you also have a phenomenon called enterohepatic recirculation, which basically means that things can get absorbed from the gut into the liver, and then the liver recycles things, puts things back into the gut. So it really is this beautiful process where if you're poisoning your gut with endotoxin or excess estrogen, or just different bacterial toxins, hydrogen sulfide is a really big problem from bacteria, and that can definitely poison the liver. Different drugs poison the gut, also poison the liver. So yeah, that was what I noticed, was that once I started to clean up the gut function, I was able to go longer between meals without feeling like hypoglycemic or like I needed to eat something in order to just maintain my energy levels. And that allowed me to be able to sleep throughout the night better, as well. But yeah, that is definitely a factor. And then, the other thing is that the amount of glycogen that the liver can store, is pretty variable. So people, if you're like very young and healthy, they've done studies where they've fed people like 500 grams of carbohydrates and they don't even start storing any of it as fat. It just all gets stored up and oxidized. And that's like just 500 grams of carbohydrates per day. And then, obviously if you have, more muscle, a lot of it goes there, but your liver can also store quite a bit. It's meant to store a lot of that and then release it, as you go. So I think that as you improve the liver function, and we can talk about different ways to potentially do that other than just improving the gut, which is probably the biggest thing. But yeah, once you can get that in order, lowering the stress, then going from meal to meal, feeling fine is pretty easy. So, nowadays, like, I'm having the orange juice now because I'm probably expending quite a bit of energy, like talking and, just thinking and whatnot. So I need extra orange juice, or like I'll have some like before the gym or whatever. But, it's not like I feel the need to like constantly be pounding sugar throughout this process. Like, my intake is pretty steady throughout the day, but it's not like I'm going in these crazy binges just to, maintain a normal level of like physiology, essentially.
Yeah. All right. I'm going to tee up a less, scientific question for Jack. But, for example, for myself, like, trying to go to the gym was always like forcing myself to go. But then now when I like eat enough, I find like when I get into the gym, it's like, I'm sweating like right away. Whereas before it'd be like 20 to 40 minutes in and I'm just like still cold. So like just in general, like, libido and like muscle building, has it been a lot easier since you've been like, I don't know, eating more and just like feeling like this kind of lifestyle just a lot different than before?
Yeah, definitely. So going low carb to the gym, we would always go fasted. And then obviously the workout's not going to be as good. Like maybe it is a little better for getting leaner possibly, but you're obviously not going to build more muscle. It's kind of intuitive. A lot of these guys that are pro fasting, they'll say that the fasting will boost your GH and get your hormones up. So the best way to put on muscle is to actually not eat, which is just not true. So, I don't feel great if I have a huge meal before the gym, but even if you're not like necessarily that hungry, you could easily get some fuel in before. A good way to do it, I found, is, coffee, milk, and sugar. So you could, get a lot of energy from the sugar. You could have orange juice first. And then since we've been doing kind of the shorter, more high intensity stuff, it's just kind of a lot easier to get in the gym because you're not going to be there for, an hour, 15 minutes. It's going to be a quick thing. And I feel like definitely having just some kind of sugar beforehand is huge in that. And then it's like, you kind of don't even mind going. It's more about the, more prevented by like the trip there takes some time. But when you're when I actually get in there after, fueling my body properly, knowing that I'm not going to be there for 2 hours, I think it makes things a lot easier.
How do you guys manage like the cold? Because I grew up in Connecticut and now I moved out of there. I'm like, I can't go back. So how do you try to like mitigate that from like a health perspective? Because it's pretty stressful to always, go outside. It's 30 degrees. You don't want to go out.
Yeah, so we just moved to Florida.
Oh shoot, that makes it easier.
Yeah. So don't really have to deal with that much.
Although I will say, like, it's such a stark contrast because the hypothyroid, like hypometabolic type of being cold is so different from the like normal, like, oh wow, it's cold. But if you're like severely hypometabolic, which like I've been before, just fasted like carnivore with horrible gut problems, like I can remember times like being out in New Jersey, like in the winter, and like literally feeling like my bones were like in a freeze type of cold, like, and it wasn't like 0 degrees outside. It was like 25 or 30, and it's like, yeah, it's cold, but like you should be able to like tolerate it. And it was literally like I was shivering so hard, it was like my body like could not produce the heat, like no matter how hard it was trying. And it was like very miserable because it's literally like your brain gets cold, like every fiber of your being is so frigid that it's like you can't even function or think. So that, yeah, living through that is hell. So I hope that we can try to help that situation with other people. Is very common that I see. I mean, even like up until a couple of years ago, like, I mean, we went to college in New Orleans, and like I would like have a blanket on like throughout the day, just doing work. And like, if anyone's ever been in New Orleans, like it's literally like a swamp. Like it's so humid and hot all the time. But I would still be cold like pretty regularly. And yeah, it's not a very ideal situation to be in, especially if you're trying to date, because girls are much colder than guys typically. And also being cold is not really great as a partner.
I think that's like probably, I mean, of all like the symptoms for like hypothyroidism, that's probably like the most debilitating, because like you said, it's like you don't want to like be around people when you're cold. It's like you want to just like huddle up. And I don't know, for myself personally, it's like when I'm cold and I'm warm, it's like like my personality, I can feel I'm different. When I'm warm, I'm more creative and like actually like wanting to go out and do stuff. So do you guys like check your temperatures now, or like how do you like recommend for someone that's like never done it? Because like the more I like go around and hang out with people, it's like everyone's cold. Like I'm in Arizona, it's like 60 degrees. Last night at a baseball game, and everyone I was with was freezing. And I'm just like, it's the hypothyroidism is getting to everyone. And I think obesity is almost 50%. So we'd have to estimate that hypothyroidism is obviously above that number by my estimates. So, or even though they say it's 5%, but I don't know, like for like the person that's never like checked their temperature or anything, what do you recommend?
I mean, I think getting into a habit of it can be good when you're kind of like first getting into this stuff, just to like understand where you're at. Because some people might not even realize, and they measure their temperature and they're like, oh my God, I'm at like 96.5, which is like borderline like hibernation levels of being cold. So yeah, and then it's like, it's good to sort of like pop open the hood and see, but you can also have the other problem, and the temperature is not as useful. So I can remember like when I first started to drink coffee like pretty regularly, like I would get so hot, it would be like the complete opposite. But I would start like just sweating and like having like this unbearable heat, and that's like really the stress response that's happening there. Like a normal, and then I would take my temperature, I would be like 99.2 or whatever. I'd be like, oh man, like my metabolism's totally cranking, but like not in a good way. So
were your hands and feet cold when you were that warm, like 99?
It wouldn't be like cold, but it just wouldn't be like, like what I experience now, like after I eat a meal or like I'm in a really good metabolic state is, like it's like this deep, it's like the complete opposite of what I was describing before. It's like this very deep type of warmth where it's like
It's like in your
you're just
hands.
very like,
It's like emanating from your hands.
yeah, it's like you feel like the water like slowly like evaporating off. I mean, you're very relaxed and it's like very cozy type of heat, and it's not like being burnt by like a sun that's like 10 miles away from you or whatever type of heat where it's like unbearable, but it's like a very nice, like just warmth. It's not like feeling super hot, which can be, a sign of stress in and of itself.
Can we touch on like the liver things? Because I know a lot of people just get prescribed T4, and if your liver is not working to convert the T4 to T3, it's pretty much useless. So how would you go about like addressing liver health besides like doing labs and stuff, and how do you try to get it better?
Yeah, I mean, even the labs can be, I don't want to say like unreliable, but in terms of testing for liver function, it can be either people don't know what exactly to order. Some of the labs, like even like liver enzymes, they're often low. Even if you have, problems storing glycogen, or if you have fatty liver, the liver enzymes don't really become elevated until you have like actual like liver damage. And then that's like a really bad situation. But in terms of trying to improve it, we talked about probably trying to reduce the bacteria and get the digestion working properly. Getting the regular bowel movements and keeping the motility up is absolutely critical for liver health. But other than that, some good tools would be vitamin K2 is extremely protective for the liver. Vitamin E, extremely protective for the liver. And that's because vitamin E prevents both the inflammation and the oxidative breakdown of polyunsaturated fats. And that process is pretty much required in order to develop, any significant type of liver damage. You need that oxidative damage to happen. But vitamin E protects against that, and it's also potent anti-inflammatory. So vitamin E is really good for that. Vitamin A and D are also very important, as long as they're in balance and you're not taking too much of one without the other. And then caffeine can be really good for that. You can prevent quite a bit of liver fat accumulation with sufficient amounts of coffee and caffeine. The coffee and liver thing is really funny, because it's like every time there's like a new study about it, it's just like it gets even crazier. It's like now it's like, oh, if you drink 8 cups of coffee a day, you have like 20 times less risk of liver cancer. So it's really like a very consistent finding. There's one study I posted, they call it like the magical bean for the liver, because every single time it's tested, they see that drinking coffee has protective effects for fatty liver, for cirrhosis, and even liver cancers. So it's extremely protective for that. And then a couple other things would be taurine and glycine. Those are also tend to be very protective for the liver, as well as choline. So choline is very high in egg yolks and liver. Choline is definitely necessary for preventing any type of liver fat accumulation or problems. And that's because essentially when the liver exports fat, it needs the choline in order to essentially shuttle it out of there, for lack of a better term. You can't export fat from the liver without sufficient amounts of choline. And it's actually like crazy how they discovered it, because they were giving kids basically intravenous nutrition, and they didn't even know that choline was like an essential nutrient. But then all these kids started getting like horrible liver diseases until they added the choline back in. And now we know that you absolutely need choline in order to prevent these liver diseases. And in fact, that's like one of the ways that you can induce it in the lab, is to feed animals methionine and choline deficient diets. So methionine can act as a precursor in a sense to choline. So if you deplete methionine, you deplete choline, you'll reliably give the animals liver fat problems. And then another good way to induce liver fat in the lab with animals is to fast them. So there's a phenomenon called it's like fasting induced like liver fat accumulation or hepatic steatosis. And that's really just because, when you're under lots of stress, all of the fat comes out from the fat tissue and it is released as free fatty acids. And then, different tissues can obviously metabolize the free fatty acids, but the liver gets the bulk of it. And then those fats, especially if they're polyunsaturated, can cause all types of problems. But any type of fat in excess can end up triggering all types of cell death and inflammation in the liver. And it'll just end up accumulating on top of the liver. So anytime you're under significant amounts of stress, or you are, fasting for too long of periods where you're releasing tons and tons of fat, the liver will acutely gain lots of fat and then chronically can end up damaging it. And then one of the other things is actually reducing serotonin. So a lot of times we think about, liver fat or liver damage being strictly like nutritional. It's like you're eating too much fat or you're eating too much sugar or whatever the case may be. Or even some of these nutritional things, but it's rarely thought of as being like a hormonal problem. But yeah, if you consider serotonin a hormone, like a GI derived hormone, it can absolutely contribute to liver fibrosis and things like that. And in fact, there's some pretty good evidence showing that some of these serotonin antagonists can prevent a lot of these liver problems, directly.
Like the liver is like pretty important because isn't it like the second most, it uses the second most resources besides the brain. So essentially, I think it's like important, like once you like learn about health a little bit more to like understand like, like what's going on so that like once a symptom comes up, you can actually, respond. For example, like I started to like heal my gut issues like 2 weeks ago. I happened to come back and drink some grape juice that wasn't refrigerated. So it had mold on the bottom and my stomach basically got like destroyed. And I can start to feel like, as the gut issues go, your mental health starts to go. So I had like cyproheptadine on hand and happened to use that. I'm not saying everyone has to like have like, stuff on hand or anything, but I just think like, have you guys felt that too? Like, as you like start to learn more, it's like, all right, like, I can kind of feel what's going on more with my body and like kind of like responds like, hey, like maybe if something's going on, I'll have like a certain supplement or, protocol or something to like, fix that.
Yeah, I've absolutely noticed that. And it's something that it's kind of like a skill that keeps developing over time. And I think it's one of these things that, people need to like relearn how to understand their body, because I think, a lot of times we're brought up saying like thinking that, oh, like if you feel some way, it's normal. Or if you feel some type of way, then it'll just go away. Or things like that. And then once you kind of discover like a new normal for yourself, like, oh, wow, I can feel like this. And then that becomes your new standard. And then you realize like, oh, wow, like even the last 6 months, like I could have been living like this. And now I got to like, this is my new baseline. Like now I understand that. And ideally you keep, progressing like that. But at the same time, ideally over time, you are, able to use those types of substances less. Like obviously they have a ton of utility. And if you're in a pinch where you ate something really bad and you didn't know, then like things like that can be, extremely helpful. But I think over time, the ideal trajectory is one where, you're taking less supplements over time. Your diet's getting more diverse over time. You're becoming less restrictive with what you're doing. If you want to go out for drinks one night with your friends and eat a taco and then, go to sleep at midnight that night, you're fine the next day. Things like that. And, I think over time it gets easier to be able to do those things because you're able to understand, what's going on with your body more. Even for myself, it took me quite a bit of time to be able to draw back, like, if I was feeling like too angry or something, like, I don't know, sometimes I yell at Jack for not great reasons. And then like, I'll peel back and then I'll be like, man, what the hell? Like, what was wrong with me? And then I'm able to like kind of reassess, after that. And then I can see like, oh, it was this, or, oh, I didn't do this or something else. And then ideally like over time, just being able to improve like that. But yeah, I think it's incredibly important, and it's something that, takes a while, and it's like a never ending process of like learning about yourself, learning about your body, and like learning what makes you feel best, especially in the long run. So yeah, and I think that's kind of lost even in the so-called like health space, where people get too focused on lab values or this study showed this or whatever the case may be. I mean, at the end of the day, like research is great. Obviously we're posting research all the time. A lot of our stuff is based on research. But at the end of the day, like people just need to understand that like if you don't feel good, then something is wrong. Like that is your body telling you that something is wrong. And you should not ignore that. Under any circumstance, doesn't matter, whatever the case may be. It's something that, I think people should pay attention to.
I think particularly like the mental health issues, because like we've like kind of pointed out, like they're largely like stemming from the gut. So if you're ever like depressed and like you're not, moving 2 to 3 times per day, like solid bowel movements, like that should probably be the first place to go versus like even a therapist or like anything else that you would want to do to like try to fix your health, even like sort of like meditation and stuff. Because I know I was like really deep into that, and nothing has ever made me like more relaxed and present than just like having my health be optimal.
Yeah, it's irreplaceable. I've been in situations throughout my life where like everything would be like good around me, or like I would have like a great friend group or like a great girl, or like or I was like, succeeding in whatever I was trying, sports or school or whatever the case may be. And like things were like objectively good in my life. But then I would feel like in certain instances, like I couldn't like fully like live in that moment or like fully enjoy it. And then I would be like, man, like I just don't understand like why like I'm feeling like this. But I think ultimately it does come down to energy and to your physiology. So there's, I think my kind of theory about this, and it could be wrong, but my whole theory behind this is that like if there is something about your body that is distracting your consciousness from the greater things in life, like true like love and fulfillment and things like that, and you're like you don't find that you're able to like engage in those things to the level that you want, I always think that it's something like about the body that is distracting. So whether it's like your gut's like a little bit bloated, or your heart is pounding a little too fast, or your breathing is like a little bit off, or you're just generally a little bit more tired or lazy, or like your brain's like not, it's like lagging or foggy, or whatever the case may be. If you have any of those things, even at a subconscious level where you're not actively thinking, wow, this is horrible. Even if those things are sort of subconsciously affecting you, I think that kind of distracts away from your consciousness. And then if you're in a state where all those things are in check, you have your energy, your gut feels good, you're not like thinking about breathing or thinking about your heart beating or anything like that. Then I think those are the moments where you truly are able to like live in the moment and like appreciate, the world around you in your life, and really feel that true sense of like fulfillment and like connectedness with the world around you. And I think that is like something that probably sounds like very like woo woo, like really like weird or hippie or whatever. But I think that that's just something that people should be able to feel. And like if they haven't, then might be time to start thinking about metabolism.
I also think that's like kind of touching on the point of like what is health, because for so long I was like overweight, so it was like, all right, just be lean. And then at this point it's like, you want to be able to, like you said, just not be focusing on your gut or like having intrusive thoughts because your serotonin's high, or whatever other like issues that like you have with your body. You just want to be like healthy enough so that you can go out and meet a girl, or vice versa, if you're a girl, meet a man, and like want to hang out with people and stuff. It's like health is not just like, okay, let me go like run a marathon or something like that. It's like that's what we're getting wrong, I think, is because like like you guys post stuff about this. It's like 75 years ago we just like ate ice cream and drank coffee and just chilled, and we were like pretty healthy. So like why do we have to do like a fast and a carnivore diet now?
Yeah, or any of that stuff, really. Like I think that is the true sign of health, when like you're not thinking about it really. It's like you're really just like living in the moment, and you're going out, you're having fun, you're doing what you love. You're out, you're exploring. Yeah, maybe you're interested in romance, and you're not, thinking like, oh well, I can't go on a date here because like it's too high in starch or whatever, like, or I can't stay out too late because of my circadian rhythm, or I can't have a drink because it's gonna like mess with my Aura Ring stats or whatever. It's like, at that point, it's not about health. And I also like do understand, because if you come from a place of very poor health, like you want to do everything in your power to like preserve your health, and improve it. But I think it's important for people to understand that, like, being on a perpetually restrictive diet with like a very strict regimen is not what I would consider to be like the ideal lifestyle or health. Like, you should be able to go and live and have fun and do what you want to do, without having to be very restrictive and boxed in with your lifestyle.
Yeah, it's really about like life. I guess that balance between life and health. And if your health is terrible, obviously you can't enjoy it. But then why would you focus so much on getting your health right if then you can't also enjoy your life? So I think that's, a huge part that a lot of people miss in like the health space, is actually living and finding that balance.
I know I remember like a year or 2 years ago, I was listening to Neil deGrasse Tyson on like Joe Rogan, and I was thinking like, imagine if this dude was like jacked, he'd be so much more intelligent. But then now I'm just like, all right, like, like once you see people like Georgie who are just like kind of, absolute like wizards, and like they don't necessarily have a six pack or like the most ideal body composition, like you realize, it's like health is beyond just like the way you look. And a lot of times the people who are looking really good, like they're suffering in other aspects of their life. So if you're not an athlete and you're just like chilling, like why would you want to, put yourself through so much stress? And, now I see that like even with like some of the people I know who are like quote unquote into health, and they'll be like going to bed at 8:30 and like, they're just actually not as healthy as like the dude who doesn't care and just like vibes and eats, relatively just eats when he's hungry. Like, it's just like all the interventions we do a lot of times, they're more stressful than the reward that we're getting out of it.
Yeah, I think it's a very common, hopeful, like, I don't know, at least I try to put that message in front of people where it's like, you should be trying to come full circle, because at one point in your life, like you weren't thinking, no matter how young you were, even if it was when you were 8 years old, where you weren't thinking about what you were eating, and, you were sleeping great and you were happy and you were free, like, and you weren't, being super neurotic about everything. I think that is like what you should be aiming for. And then people tend to go on this journey where it's like, all right, I'm trying to improve my health. And then they get down this rabbit hole, which like has a good intent, which is like, you're just trying to feel better and whatnot. But then it gets to a point where you lose sight of what you're actually trying to do. I've been in terrible situations like that where I can look back and be like, I can't even believe that I thought that was okay. Like, I remember there was a time when I was doing like the fasting stuff where my girlfriend at the time was coming to visit me, and it was like the only time that I saw her in like 2 months. And I literally like lied that like I couldn't go out to dinner with her because I was like trying to fast that night. And like, I can like look back and be like, dude, I was just like fucking like mentally ill or something. Like the fact that like I thought that was like the route to health, like literally like ignoring my girlfriend and like not seeing her for like one of the only nights I was going to see her before she literally like left the country. Like it's just insane to me. But yeah, I mean, I think in the ideal scenario, people, may go through situations like that, but I hope to at least spread a message where it's like, you should be trying to come full circle and come back to that youthful state where, you're able to live a free life. Cause that's really like what we're trying to do, not getting heart disease or, preventing cancer, those things are all cool, but it doesn't really matter if you live till 100, if you're, not having fun along the way.
Mm-hmm. It's like the paradox though, because it's like, I like to think like the barometers for health now are like, obviously you want to like not be like severely overweight and stuff like that. But like, if you're like able to like laugh and have fun and be around people, like that's genuinely a good sign that you're healthy. And then the problem is in modern society, if you do that and you just go out, like all the things are pointing you towards like drinking or, eating like seed oils and stuff. So eventually, like if you just do that, you'll eventually degrade your health. So then you don't want to be around people. So it's almost like, like, where do we go? So like, I think like, most people who get into like this kind of like health, like normally it's because they like felt like horrible and then started dialing in and then you're like, oh, like there's just like a balance here. So I just think it's fun because like now it's like, all right, I don't need to restrict anything. Don't need to like feel like I'm like not doing anything. I like when I used to eat the carnivore diet, I would literally feel like I was like not around, like I wasn't like as social because I was like not wanting to go out to eat, like all the things we said, it's just like, let me just eat my meat by myself and not be bothered. But yeah, kind of just
definitely
reiterating what you said, but I don't want to keep you guys any longer. I appreciate, the technical stuff and then also just like your experience. Cause I think like, your YouTube videos, like the serotonin one, I think like everyone should just watch that just to understand like, the kind of like the stuff that's going on is like not okay. So how can people like get in touch with you guys? I know you guys just launched your coaching stuff.
Yeah, sure. So I guess in the bio or whatever, link.bio/Anaylyze&optimize, you can find all of our links there. Anaylyze and Optimize on YouTube and on X, same thing. You can just look that up. We're on Instagram too, trying to grow that. So mainly going to be that YouTube, X, and then Instagram. And then we also just launched our health consulting service, 2 or 3 months ago. So it's a pretty new company, but it's got that gut focus. We have a lot of practitioners on the team they all follow the bioenergetic approach, like we do. So it's kind of like our content, just, personalized for you. And for that, that'll be in our link bio, but you could also go to www.prism.miami. That's it. There's no .com or anything to learn about it. And, we've been seeing a lot of benefit with the people we've been working with. So, with our approach, we think it's just like completely outside of the box. We're doing stuff a lot differently than really we believe anybody else. So it's definitely worth checking out for sure.
I appreciate it, guys. Enjoy Florida. And, until next time.
Yeah.
Yeah, man. Thanks for having us.
Really appreciate it. Thanks, Luke.